Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. And in today's video, I will be reviewing X-Men Apocalypse. So I'm going to start off by saying that this movie is very long, and that made this movie kind of boring in a way. There were some action scenes that were pretty good, but otherwise the other scenes felt like they dragged on, and this movie really did not need to be 2 hours and 30 minutes long. I'm going to start off with talking about the stuff that I did enjoy about this movie. As usual, I really enjoyed Magneto's character. He is the only consistently good character in this movie series. He had a more impactful presence at the beginning of the movie, and less of a presence towards the end. At the beginning of the movie, they showed that he was indeed trying to have a normal life, and he had a wife and daughter. One day, a freak accident happened at work, and he had to use his powers to save the man that was about to be killed. Unfortunately, he was reported to the local police. This was obviously a problem because of the events of X-Men Days of Future Past. In a freak accident, one of the policemen kills both his daughter and wife, setting him off on a path of revenge yet again. I also really like the scene with Magneto where they were at Auschwitz, and he is finally figuring out his true power. I like the fact that his power gets better and better throughout the series of movies, and that they are very consistent. Anyways, I really like this scene because it shows the fact that he can control the metal within the Earth, and that he is far more powerful than many other mutants. I also like the idea of the mutants that we are introduced to not being at their full power. What I mean by this is the fact that we are to assume that they have really good powers, but then we don't realize the full potential of what they can do until they transformed by Apocalypse. I just like the idea of seeing some of these heroes have their powers put to the extreme. My favorite one was Angel. I really like the fact that his wings were turned into metal blades. I just wish we got more out of those wings, just to see what he was able to do with them, but unfortunately we weren't given much of his character really. I also like that we got a cameo from Wolverine. I also really like the fact that they seem to be a bit more comfortable with his brutality in this movie, because they actually show blood, which is kind of shocking considering that in the older movies they didn't really show us that at all. I will talk more about this scene later because it does affect continuity. I cannot forget the best scene of this entire movie. The scene I am talking about is the scene with Quicksilver, where he saves everybody from the school as it is blowing up. I think it is universally agreed upon that this was one of the best scenes out of the entire series of the newer X-Men movies. I just love how detailed the scene was, and their music selection was spot on. This just proves from my last review that Fox seemed to know how to show how fast Quicksilver truly was. Again, as I stated in the last review, I hope that when super speed mutants are introduced to the MCU, that they use this technique. If I'm going to be honest, that was really all that was great about this movie. Otherwise, this movie felt too long and borderline boring, and it really messed with continuity. Before I talk about the worst part about this movie, I just want to ask a question. So, the movie before this one was X-Men Days of Future Past, and there was some time traveling involved. For me, I assume that this means that the original X-Men movies still indeed happened. This is my question I'm going to put forward. Is this still part of the same timeline as the original X-Men movies? Because there's no way that they would blatantly destroy the continuity without it being in an alternate timeline. I'm going to base my second part of the review off of me assuming that this is the same timeline as the original X-Men movies. I'm going to point out the most obvious continuity error, and that's the one with Wolverine. As we all know, Wolverine was tested on by William Stryker, and was given adamantium. We get a scene where all of our main heroes are inside of William Stryker's base, and this is the same time that Wolverine got his adamantium. I want to say before I continue that this movie was made after X-Men Origins Wolverine. Because we had X-Men Origins Wolverine, it has already been established what happened with that storyline and how he escaped and how it went wrong. The first continuity problem is the fact that Wolverine never bumped into other mutants during his escape. The other fact is that Jean Grey put those memories into his head, and it was never established that actually happened. I understand that it was a cool cameo and all that, but it was put in such a weird way that it interferes with the continuity of the X-Men Origins movie, and I just don't like when they try to connect things together in a poor way. Another little thing was the fact that this whole storyline was bad for continuity. I say this because wouldn't you think such an apocalyptic event would have been talked about for years and years after the fact? For such a monumental thing to happen, like Magneto basically destroying many things across the entire planet, including the Sydney Opera House, which is a pretty major landmark in Australia, wouldn't you think that this would have still been talked about many years after the fact? Not to mention the fact that Storm was on Apocalypse's side. Again, wouldn't that have been mentioned as well? This is why prequels have to be written so well, is because they should be afraid of messing with continuity. So then they make the movies as well written as you possibly can. Having major flaws within the storyline's continuity could actually ruin the original movies that were placed after these prequels. I'm now starting to understand why everybody has such a hard time with the continuity of this franchise. I myself for many years didn't really worry about the continuity because I just played and enjoyed the movies. But now that I'm taking a good look at these movies, I am now realizing why it was so confusing. The other thing I wanted to mention was the consistency with powers. In my opinion, there has not been any consistency problem with powers since the first X-Men movie. After that, it seemed like everyone's powers were all very consistent and worked very well with each other. In this movie, that seems to all go out the window just for story convenience. Let's start out with the nitpicky one, and that is with Nightcrawler. They said in the original X-Men movie that he can only travel to where he could see or remember, and that is the same for this movie, which is great. But there's a problem with that. So there were parts of this movie where Nightcrawler teleported to places that he's never been to. For instance, the most blatant one was near the end of the movie where they had to get in the pyramid, so Nightcrawler just teleported into the pyramid. It's kind of funny because he's never been inside of that pyramid, so how would he know how to teleport in there? The other one was when Nightcrawler teleports Jean Grey and Scott into the helicopter that was going to Stryker's base. He never actually looked into the helicopter, so that must mean that he didn't know what the inside of the helicopter looked like. So how in the heck did he get in there? It just feels like story convenience to me. The second one was a lot more obvious, and I'm actually kind of surprised that they missed this in the script. This problem was with Jean Grey and her power. I want to say, though, her powers are pretty cool, and the last scene where she uses her full power is pretty cool as well, but it's not as cool when you realize this next detail. It was stated at the beginning of the movie that Jean Grey didn't know how to control her power, and it was said quite a lot at the beginning of the movie. I point this out because throughout the entire movie, she explicitly shows that she can control her power. For instance, in one scene, when there were a bunch of soldiers looking for the mutants, she was able to camouflage her, Nightcrawler, and Scott at the same time. How would somebody be able to do this if they can't control their power? The same thing happened again when they were running around the base, where they were able to run around everything because they were camouflaged by her power. Yet another issue with this was that she was able to communicate with people through their minds, for instance Scott and Charles Xavier. She was also able to mentally fight Apocalypse, and then unleash her full power upon him. Every time something like this happened, I was thinking in my head, I thought she couldn't control her powers. But obviously it seems like she's fully capable of controlling all of her powers. I just don't like it in movies, especially when they clearly state something, and then they say it multiple times, and then they immediately go against what they just said. So, what would I rate X-Men Apocalypse? I think I'm going to rate it about a 6 out of 10. I gave it that number because this is the worst one out of all of them so far, and this movie overall wasn't that great. It had a few good scenes, but that doesn't make an entire movie good. I really like the scenes with Magneto, as well as seeing that scene in the middle of the movie with Quicksilver. Otherwise, this movie felt very generic, and it messed with continuity quite a bit, which for me really doesn't agree with me. Overall, this movie has a couple of good scenes and major continuity errors, and it was just too long. My next review will be on X-Men Dark Phoenix, and from what I remember of that movie, it was worse than this one. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and see you in the next review.